Hey everybody, my name's Democracy, and today we're going to be taking a look at some of the toughest, roughest, and blubberiest bosses. One of my favorite parts of the boss ranking series was reading what you guys thought individually in the comments. It made for some really fun discussion that I'd love to see more of. So with the community rankings in the books, it's time for me to break out some of my own top 10s. These lists are going to be from my perspective, so I encourage you all to keep sounding off in the comments with your own thoughts. Without further ado, let's kick off my list of the top 10 hardest bosses in Soulsborne. Coming in at number 10 are the fabled Gankers. If you go off the legend of these two warriors, you might be surprised that I have them ranked at the bottom of the list. To be honest with you, they were very close to being ousted for Dark Lurker, but they just slightly won out because I struggled with them a good bit more my first playthrough. Remembering back to that time, I was in a state of immense terror knowing this boss was looming once I reached Anor Londo. I'd heard many horror stories of players spending hours upon hours getting bested by this duo. That got in my head completely, and I struggled quite a bit once I reached them. So I got beaten around quite a bit. I want to say that I died at least 10 times before I finally claimed victory over these two. I struggled so much to overcome being outnumbered, and their perfect complementary playstyle just threw me off a lot. But the fight is definitely easier today than it was back then. After growing a pair and giving them the business a few times, I have a lot more confidence in this fight. It felt incredible to beat them in my first go in the boss ranking run, even though I barely pulled it off. And that's my favorite part about this fight. Even when the odds are stacked against you and with oppressive difficulty, this battle is still one of the most satisfying in the series. At number 9, we've got the Headless Bloodletting Beast. The first time I ran the Chalices, this was one of the few bosses that I had some serious struggles with. A big part of that is how hard the damn thing hits. I swear, even with this obscenely large health bar I had in this fight, the beast was still able to kill me in just 2 to 3 hits. That's insane. If I remember correctly, this character was blood level 190 with like 70 vitality or something. Not only does it have great damage, but the range on its hits are unparalleled. This one punch can actually hit you across the entire arena. Luckily, I've gotten good at dodging this attack, but the one attack I hate with an absolute passion is the Slam. This move seems to hit you wherever the hell it damn well pleases. I get that maybe it's supposed to be a quake or something, but you would think the ground shaking wouldn't hurt you that bad. Unlike ONS, I haven't really gotten good at fighting the Headless Bloodletting Beast. The greed gets me almost every time, and I'm not even close to mastering dodging his attacks. And honestly, this is a fight I may never master, because I don't know if I ever want to run the Chalices again. Next up at number 8 is Manus, Father of the Abyss. There's a lot of bosses in Dark Souls that take inspiration from Demon Souls, and while I don't think Manus is a direct copy, he shares a lot of similarities with one particular boss, Flame Lurker. So yeah, our community ranked hardest Demon Souls boss is very similar to our community ranked hardest Dark Souls boss. Fancy that. I'm seeing a pattern here, and that pattern is that these bosses are insanely aggressive, put out absurd amounts of damage, and move as fast as any boss in the series. And then Manus ups the challenge even further by adding in dark spells, a smaller and less exploitable arena, and he doesn't share Flame Lurker's massive weakness to magic. So what can you do against this boss? Well, get your ass destroyed! I'm 100% sure that in my boss run of Dark Souls, I would have struggled 10 times more with Manus if I had put even 5 points less in vitality. There were so many times I was on the brink of death. I've heard a lot of you say a Great Shield can trivialize Manus, but I've never used one before. I guess that's just not my playstyle. Instead, I like recklessly rushing bosses and trading damage. This is a risky strategy though that Manus is definitely great at exploiting. Coming in at number bullshit is the Roland Camera Beast. Yeah, if I didn't already make it apparent in the ranking video, I hate this boss. A lot. As indicated by the nickname, you'll spend more time fighting the camera in this battle than you will this hairy dog rat. That's because this thing moves easily as fast, if not faster, than the most nimble bosses in the series. Your only hope for handling this boss effectively is to get under it, but because of the aforementioned speed, this is a total pain in the ass. The goal with the beast is to hit its legs enough for it to fall. Once you do that, if you've got the damage to keep it down, you're in the clear. You have to have really high damage to be able to do this against a souped up model of Camera Beast though. So you'll likely find yourself spending a large portion of the fight chasing it down, or even better, getting beaten down. On higher level characters, maybe above 100, this fight isn't quite as bad, but when I faced this beast on a blood level 60, I found it nearly impossible. I gotta give much respect to the blood level 4 heroes out there. I cannot even imagine the perseverance it would take to stick with this boss fight long enough to conquer it at that level. But as if a breath of fresh boss air just blew in, we've got one of the best bosses in the series at number 6, Knight Artorias. At least for me, this boss is in the top 3 hardest bosses to read in the series. I have a crazy amount of trouble trying to predict what Artorias is going to do next. This often makes me greedy, thinking he's not going to do anything, and then I get punished. Again, and again. So patience is a big key in this fight, which admittedly is not my strong suit. I always feel a kind of pressure to attack now, and I need to do more damage. This feeling probably gets me killed more than anything else in these games, but that's part of what defines the difficulty of Soulsborne bosses for me. I believe the reason that players' experiences differ so much is based on playstyle. Mine tends to be recklessly aggressive, so bosses that are quick and hit hard often exploit my weaknesses as a player. Artorias undoubtedly takes advantage of this, and it's part of what I love about the Fallen Warrior. At number 5, we've got our first Dark Souls 3 boss. Before making this list, I decided to do a complete second playthrough to really get a full gauge of the boss difficulty in that game. There's just something about once you've beaten a boss once that makes it easier. So while I'm happy to report that I didn't die 15 plus times to the princes this time around, they still claim victory over me at least 5 times. And it still boils down to the same problem. I really just am bad at dodging Lorien. Well, let me be more specific. I'm not actually so bad at dodging Lorien, it's more so that I have a hard time gauging when I should and shouldn't try to get some hits in. This leads me to getting whacked a lot by Lorien, and then I start scrambling to try and heal, and it just all goes downhill from there. So if I'm bad at handling just him, you can imagine Lothric's magic makes my frantic attempts at dodging even worse. This is another fight where I feel like I'd be best served taking a deep breath and just analyzing the boss's moves more, but there's just something about these twins that give me a sense of panic. That easily earns them a spot in the top 5 for me. Our number 4 selection is the only boss on this list from Dark Souls 2. You know how I mentioned my biggest weakness in these games was an unwarranted sense of urgency? Well, I do have another big one. One that Blue Kool-Aid over here exploits perfectly. I have a terrible habit of dodging when I see the wind-up begin, not when the hit is about to land. I can't even count how many hits I could have avoided in these games if I just reacted to the hit instead of the wind-up. The reason this bastard is so difficult for me is that the Smelter Demons in general have a tendency to really delay their attacks. To make matters worse, after finally getting at least a little bit used to the Orange Demon's timing, you come against the blue model that has varying timings to sometimes hit faster and sometimes hit slower. So not only do I have to overcome my knack for dodging at the improper time, but I also have to unlearn all the muscle memory from the orange one. That makes this boss an absolutely brutal experience for me, and that's putting aside the incredibly awful run to his boss arena. So we've been talking about a lot of bosses with delayed attack patterns and high pressure tactics. You know what would make that even worse? Having half of your health. Yeah, our number 3 boss offers everything I've been describing up to this point, and by nature of the dungeon, you have to fight him at 50% HP. This guy is also in a layer 4 dungeon, which scales his damage up high enough to kill you in 1 or 2 hits. That's just insane. If I were to wager a guess, I would say this boss ranks right up there with the princes as the boss I died to the most in my first playthrough. I heard all the horror stories, but I felt like it wouldn't be that bad after spanking his ass in an earlier dungeon. Well, no, just no. Fortunately, I've developed a nice strategy of breaking his face armor safely, but even then I still die often trying to do it. If I were to rank this solely off my first playthroughs, Watchdog might actually take the top spot. But thinking about these bosses in the context of how hard they are for me today, I think this is the right spot for this flaming terror. At number 2, we've got a boss that really does have his difficulty hype through the roof at the moment. And even though I may not have racked up absurd death totals on this guy, I still think he is without a doubt in the running for the hardest boss in the series. A large part of this fact is that this is 2 boss battles in one. And even though after some practice the King of Storms phase isn't that bad, I'm still liable to lose a couple flasks to some poorly timed dodges. Once you make it to the King himself though, the fight changes drastically. On one hand, I think the King telegraphs all his attacks with more than enough time to react, but he also has some sporadic delays in his combos that catch me off guard. Add that in with the fact this guy has an incredibly large pool of health and has a knack for decimating yours in a single hit, you start to recognize this fight for what it really is, a battle of endurance. And there's many other fights like this in the series that take a lot of time, but I can't think of many that had such challenging fights to accompany them. And of course, the time it takes to down the King puts ants in my pants and causes me to make greedy mistakes. But there's one last boss that exploits all of this better than anyone. I don't think it could have been anybody else. Orphan Accost is without a doubt my choice for the hardest boss in Soulsborne. Take everything I've said up to this point and imagine it all pumped to the max inside this body of a tiny shrimp man. And you know, as a quick segue, there was a commenter that mentioned his shrimp is actually his placenta. Well, God, enjoy thinking about that the next time he's slamming it all over your face. You better get used to it too, because this guy just whips around the arena like a flying squirrel on acid. And that's a good analogy because he likes to throw his placenta juice at you. Blech, maybe I'm squeamish, but I'd be lying if I said the nastiness of this boss doesn't get in my head. I'll attempt to put that aside so I can paint a picture of just how this guy is unrelenting as Manus, as erratic as Artorias, offers varying speeds of attack to rival Blue Kool-Aid, has an HP pool that the King would envy, the attack strength of the Watchdog, the oppressive atmosphere of ONS, the deceptive range of the Bloodletting Beast, the closing speed of the Camera Beast, and he just kicks my ass as hard as the Prince's. Woo! That should just about do it. So Orphan, congratulations. I never feel like I've had more of a challenge against any boss in Soulsborne than when I go toe-to-toe with you. Well everyone, I hope you enjoyed my ranking of the top 10 hardest bosses in Soulsborne. Now it's your turn to sound off in the comments on which bosses you find the hardest. Next up, we're gonna rank the top 10 easiest bosses, so be sure to subscribe for more awesome Soulsborne content. I wanna thank y'all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.